I want to tell you about the summer I worked as a seasonal ranger at a national park in the Pacific Northwest. I'm not going to say which one. I've thought about that a lot, and I've decided it's better if I don't. This was 4 years ago. I was 23, just finished my degree, and I needed money badly. The seasonal position paid okay, gave me housing in a small staff cabin, and the idea of spending a summer in the woods sounded like the best thing in the world. I had no cell service out there. No Wi-Fi. The nearest town was 40 minutes by car, and I didn't own a car. I want you to keep that in mind because it matters later. My first few weeks were calm. Really calm. I was doing trail checks, picking up litter, answering questions from visitors, marking down trees on a map. Normal stuff. My supervisor, a guy named Dale, was quiet but seemed decent. The other seasonal worker, a woman named Priya, was friendly. We'd eat dinner together sometimes and talk about nothing important. The park was beautiful. I mean that in a way that's hard to explain. The trees were so tall you couldn't see the tops without tilting your head all the way back. The air smelled like pine and cold water, and something sweet I never figured out. At night, you could hear owls, and sometimes the wind would come through the trees and it sounded almost like breathing. Almost. I noticed the first thing in my 3rd week. It was small and I almost didn't catch it. I was checking a section of trail about 2 miles from the main visitor center. A quiet trail. Not a lot of foot traffic. And I saw a pair of hiking boots sitting in the middle of the path. Just sitting there. Upright. Neatly placed. Laces tucked inside. Not untied. Not loose, just left there like someone set them down carefully and walked away. I stood there for a moment and looked at them. My brain went, someone forgot these, and I picked them up and carried them back to the lost and found box at the ranger station. Dale looked at the boots, didn't say anything, and put them in the box. That was it. That was the whole thing. I went home that night and made dinner and watched the light go out through my cabin window, and I did not think about the boots again. Not once. A week later, I found a small camp just off the trail. Not an official campsite. Someone had been sleeping there, maybe for a while. There was a flattened patch of grass and a ring of stones for a fire, but the stones were cold and covered in pine needles. I figured it was just a hiker who'd camped without a permit. That happens all the time. I noted the location and told Dale. He wrote it down without looking up. The smell hit me before I saw the next thing. I was on a different trail, the one that runs along the creek on the north side of the park. It was a cool morning, maybe 50 degrees, and the creek smell was strong. But underneath it there was something else, something like wet dog, or old meat, but faint, mixed in with everything. I couldn't place it. And then I saw the marker. It was on a tree about 10 feet off the trail. A small cut in the bark, low down, maybe knee-height, clean cut. Like from a knife. A straight vertical line. I told myself an animal had done it. I told myself a hiker had done it to mark a route. I told myself there were 100 explanations. But I started looking at trees more carefully after that. And I found more cuts. Different trees, different sections of trail. Always low. Always the same shape. Always alone, never clusters. I mentioned it to Priya one evening. She got quiet. She said she'd seen something similar last summer when she'd done a season at a different park. She said she'd told her supervisor about it and he told her it was probably kids messing around and that was the end of it. She didn't look at me when she said it. That night I lay in my cabin and listened to the wind in the trees, and I thought about the boots. I thought about how clean they were, how neatly placed, laces tucked in like someone who cared about their things. And I thought about how you don't take off your boots and leave them in the middle of a trail unless something made you take them off, or unless you weren't the one who put them there. I heard something outside my cabin, a slow, soft crunch of steps on the pine needles. It stopped near the back of the cabin, and then nothing. I stayed still and stared at the ceiling and breathed very carefully through my nose. My hands were cold even though the cabin was warm. The steps didn't come back. I know what you're thinking. Animal. Deer, maybe. And I told myself that too. But the next morning I went round to the back of the cabin. I don't know what I was expecting. Nothing, probably. Just to prove to myself it was nothing. There were no tracks. The pine needles were thick back there, soft, the kind that hold impressions. A deer would have left something. Even a raccoon would have left something. The ground was undisturbed in every direction except for one spot, maybe 4 feet from the back wall, where the needles had been swept aside in a small semicircle. Like someone had crouched there. Like someone had stayed low and stayed still for a while. I looked at it for a long time. Then I went inside and made coffee and did not go back to look at it again. The following week I went back to the North Trail to run a routine check and I found the campsite again. Not the same one. A new one. Different location, but the same setup. Flat ground, no fire, no trash, nothing left behind except the pressed grass. Except this time there was something left behind. A small piece of paper, folded twice, tucked under one of the stones. I unfolded it. There was nothing written on it. It was blank, but it had been torn from something, like a notebook page. And along the torn edge I could see the beginning of a line. Just the curve of a letter. Or maybe a number. I took it to Dale. He looked at it for a long time. Then he asked me where exactly I found it and I told him. He wrote the coordinates down. He did not put the paper in the lost and found. He put it in his shirt pocket. And then he told me to take the afternoon off. Very calm, friendly even. I went back to my cabin and I sat on the edge of my bed and I tried to think clearly. And that's when I started counting. I counted back through every strange thing. The boots, the old campsite, the cuts on the trees, the smell, the steps outside, the swept needles behind my cabin, the new camp. The paper. And then I thought about something else. Something that had been sitting at the back of my mind without shape until that moment. I had never seen a single piece of lost and found ever get claimed. Not one item. Wallets, jackets, those boots. They went into the box and they stayed there. But the box was never full. It had maybe a dozen things in it when I arrived, and it still had about a dozen things 2 months later. Someone was emptying it. I stood up. I walked to the station. Dale's truck was gone. I opened the lost and found box. The boots weren't there. I went through every item in that box slowly. Jacket, water bottle, sunglasses, child's glove, a small red flashlight with no batteries. I knew that box. I had added things to it. And I was certain, I was completely certain, that there had been a worn leather wallet in there since my second week. Brown leather. Initials scratched into the corner. It was gone. I stood there in the empty station with the box open in my hands, and I listened to the wind outside, and I thought about the cuts in the bark. How low they were. Knee height. Like someone small was making them, or like someone was making them to be read by someone walking slowly, close to the ground, looking for something, or tracking something. I thought about Priya. I hadn't seen her that morning, which wasn't unusual, but suddenly I needed to know where she was. I walked to her cabin and knocked. No answer. Her car was there. I knocked again, harder, and waited. The door opened. She looked at me, and immediately she knew something was wrong. I could tell by the way her face changed before I even said anything. I told her about the box, about the swept needles, about all of it, everything I had been collecting in my head for weeks, laid out in order. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, "Go home." Not your cabin. Home. Get off this mountain. I asked her if she was coming. She said she had 1 more week on her contract. She said she needed the money. I left 2 days later. I told them it was a family emergency. I walked to the road and I hitched a ride to town, and I bought a bus ticket with the last money I had. I filed no report. I made no calls. I tried to find Priya afterward. I had her last name from a staff email. I searched for her online a few times over the following months. I don't want to tell you what I found, or what I didn't find. I'll just say that it didn't make me feel better. I don't know what was happening in that park. I don't know who the camp belonged to. I don't know who was emptying the lost and found, or why, or what any of it means when you put it together. But Dale knew. I'm sure of that. Whatever it was, he knew. And he didn't want me looking at it.